So basically, right now, just to have like a checkpoint in terms of where we are, we just finished our module 2 exam. So thank you so much for doing all the exercises. My promise to you would be I'll be able to submit your updated class standing by tonight. The reason being I'll be able to give you your updated class standing because one of the important dates is like December 1, which is Friday, would be the deadline for dropping. So for me, I'll also be very transparent naman what would be the batch average. Why? Not because I want you to compare yourself against others, but you can use that as a benchmark in terms of um you can use that as a benchmark in terms of your performance. Meaning, my request is that if malapit naman kayo sa batch average, then my recommendation is let's just apply all of our learnings from Module 1 and Module 2 and then let's just finish the SEM strong. Kasi kaya pa naman natin hatakin with the remaining 35% for the remaining semester. So with that said, just to go back in terms of ano na ba yung mga mabibigay ko sa inyo in terms of class standing. We're already done. You already know 33% in terms of your quiz set 1, long exam 1, your first module performance. I'll be able to give you your 5% score based on our first quiz in terms of inventory. And then the second 5%, I'll be able to announce by Friday based on our special quiz. So at the very least, by December 1, after class hours, the idea is you'll already know roughly 70% of your class standing. So parang I'll also give you the computation on how many points you'll need to be able to pass, how many points you'll need in terms of taking the removal. So I'll also set aside time on Friday for any consultations. So parang kung mayroon kayong mga questions, clarifications, last things to do in the SEM, we'll be able to discuss that by Friday. So face-to-face tayo on Friday. So with that said, the last module, module 3, so admittedly, module 2, we have a lot of compressed time due to a lot of parang switches in terms of class schedule. For module 3, just wanted to have a parang reality check in terms of like the remaining days. So we only have basically a few weeks in December left. And then parang your exam will be January. So the idea is mabilis ulit yung pace. For this, dalawa lang naman yung key topics that would be accounts receivable and property, plant, and equipment. So based on my experience, a lot of students parang nahirapan talaga sila sa inventory. But come AR and PPE, parang mas nagigets nila how to really do well in terms of accounting. So before I begin our lecture in receivables, which I'll be tackling today, so tatapusin ko yung concept lecture, are there any questions from the class? And then for those na was not able to take the long exam, I'll also update you in terms of like ano ba yung strategy when it comes to the special makeup exam and our schedule. So just getting final updates from the department. Are there any questions? If none, kindly thumbs up so that we can focus now on module 3 in terms of sige. Okay. Sige. So with that said, let's now go in terms of accounts receivable, right? So accounts receivable, module 2, focus lang natin was inventory and then cash. And then honestly, in terms of accounts receivable, we've actually familiarized ourselves in terms of like the different journal entries. So honestly, in terms of this topic, it should be very straightforward. Isa lang yung mahirap na concept dito, which would be the concept of bad debt expense and allowance for doubtful accounts. And then from there, I think yung kailangan yung tutukan is how to solve for notes receivable. So basically, in terms of like the subtopics, it's really just focus on accounts receivable, no credit card sales, and then finally, parang know how to actually create your journal entries for your notes receivable. And then of course, similar with inventory, we're also going to be providing you with some financial ratios so that you can analyze and understand your financial statements. So with that said, let's begin when it comes to defining muna, right? So basically, in terms of any asset class, the very first thing that we want to do is really define ano nga ba, what makes a receivable a receivable. And in essence, Receivable is just basically amounts due from individuals or companies wherein yung claims mo, you expect to turn it into cash. So basically, there's like 3 crucial steps in a receivable. Basically, nag-earn ka ng revenue, pero rather than getting cash automatically, basically, magkakaroon ka lang ng receivable. And then the expectation is that from that receivable, you'll eventually be able to turn it into cash. So for example, let's say, aside from teaching, nag-offer ako ng tutoring services. And then, basically, the idea would be, let's say, a tutoring service is like 200 pesos. So, rather than receiving 200 pesos after the session, usually, iipunin mo muna yun for the month. So, let's say I have 5 sessions for the month. So, 200 times 5, 1,000. So, that would mean that I have 1,000 in terms of receivable. So, what makes it receivable? It's an amount due. So, may utang sa akin yung student in terms of paying 1,000 pesos. Pero the idea is, and the reason why it's a current asset is that if nabayaran niya na ako in terms of yung utang niya sa akin, I'll be able to turn it into cash. So the importance of receivable is that the end goal naman talaga is always to be able to turn it into cash. Because again, as you can see from Module 2, cash is king, and it's what really runs the different businesses. So with that said, there are actually 3 different types of receivables. So there are what we call trade receivables. So basically, these are receivables that arise from sales transaction. So you'll have your AR or your accounts receivable, and you'll have your notes receivable. And then you'll have your non-trade or other receivables. So punta muna tayo dun sa other receivables, meaning you'll have interest receivable, loans to company officers, and advances to employees. So my tip for you is that for non-trade receivables, those are yung mga utang that's not related in terms of your actual operations. Like for example, interest, that's related to a bank loan. Loans to company officers, meaning nag-advance ka to a key employee in your company. So basically, may utang lang sa'yo yung company officers. Advances to employees, same concept. Iba-iba lang yung pangalan niya, but the general idea is that meron kang receivable not arising from sales transactions, but arising from things outside your regular operations. So first classification of receivables, non-trade receivables. So for me, you just have to familiarize yourselves in terms of like the different names. Kahit iba-iba pa yan, kahit walang receivable in the name, the concept is that because of a transaction that's outside of your operation, nagkakaroon ng utang sa'yo yung isang tao, and then may expected kang cash in return. On the other hand, and I think we're very familiar with this, we have our AR or accounts receivable and notes receivable that arise from sales transactions. So ano pagkakaiba ng AR and notes receivable? So in Module 1, maraming nalilito what would be the difference. But basically, ang mangyayari lang naman sa AR is that wala kang masyadong formal instrument of credit. So basically, ang source niya is just nag-sell ka ng goods or services. And then usually, mabilis lang yung collection period. Usually 1 to 2 months. So 30 to 60 days. So mas short term si accounts receivable. On the other hand, notes receivable, like what I mentioned in Module 1, usually refers to mga banks, right? So, or mga long-term credit, wherein meron kayong actual document or instrument of credit. And the difference between AR and NR would be, number 1, in terms of collection, mas matagal usually ang notes receivable. And dahil mas matagal siya, what's the added benefit to yung nagpautang? Meron rin siyang interest. So, to summarize, trades receivable, yung AR, walang interest. Yung notes receivable, may interest. And yung notes receivable, may formal instrument of credit. So, basically, yun lang naman yung concept. This would be our major topic for this particular chapter. We'll have to know how to account for ARs. We have to know how to account for notes receivable, and then other subtopics. So, with that said, let's now jump into accounting for accounts receivable. So, accounts receivable muna tayo kasi mas madali siya, right? So, in accounts receivable, yung recording process can actually be broken down into 3 major phases. So, you'll have your initial recognition. So, nagkaroon ka ng revenue, pero nagkaroon ka ng receivable. So, this one, initial recognition, should be familiar to you. Number two, you'll have your subsequent measurement. So you'll have two methods. So you'll have your direct write-off method and your allowance method. And then you'll have your disposal. So you'll have your discounting and factoring. So ito yung mga subtopics for receivables. Now, let's go muna sa initial recognition. So, in terms of accounts receivable, we measure accounts receivable at what? At fair value at point of sale. So, dalawa lang naman yung usual accounts for this. Nagkaroon ka ng sale, pero it's on account or credit. So, that would be debit AR, credit sales revenue. That's the first journal entry. And then, let's say, because nagbenta ka kware ng, let's say, 10 stuffed toys. And out of those 10 stuffed toys, parang 5, parang may butas. So, syempre, i-return sa'yo nung tao. And what did we learn from inventory? That would be a reversal of the amount that you need to get. So, magiging debit sales return and allowance, credit accounts receivable. So, something that you're very familiar with. So, let's have an example. So, in December 1, RRC Pudge Corp sold to Podico tote bag merchandise for 120,000, terms 5, 10, and 30. And Buddy returned 20,000 worth of accounts receivable. So ano yung mga journal entry dito? So number 1, our journal entry would be to recognize the initial sale. So that would be debit AR, credit sales of 120,000, right? So debit AR, credit sales of 120. But out of that 120,000 worth of nabenta mo, Buddy returned 20,000. So we have to reverse a portion of the 120,000 sale. So ano yung journal entry 2? Debit, sales return and allowance, credit, accounts receivable. So when I ask you, ano na lang yung total AR na may expect mo or how much cash will you be able to receive? The answer would definitely be 120,000 minus 20,000. So 100,000 na lang yung may expect mo, which makes sense, right? So next step is that, okay, meron na tayong sale, meron na rin tayong concept na, okay, paano na-return? The last concept that you have to familiarize yourself in terms of the initial recognition is nag-collect ka ng AR. And similar with our inventory, tatlo lang naman yung scenarios dyan. Nagbayad ng maaga, yung may utang sa'yo, so it's early. So meaning, makaka-avail siya ng sales discount. Nagbayad siya within the term, meaning, basically na-collect mo lang yung AR, walang discount. And then, nagbayad siya ng late. So, magkakaroon siya ng extra utang sa'yo. Magkakaroon siya ng finance charge. Why? Because you want to penalize them for paying late. So, let's see. In December 4, nagbayad ng outstanding AR to RR si Pudge. Kailan yung term? December 1, 5-10. So, ignore first day, count last day. So, 1, ignore. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So, pag nagbayad ka before December 11, you'll be able to avail of the discount. Kailan siya nagbayad? December 4. Meaning, for this particular scenario, it would fall under they paid early. So, ano yung journal entry? So unahin nyo muna yung credit AR. So, 100,000. Pero, instead of receiving the full 100,000, they're entitled to a 5% discount kasi they paid within 10 days. So now, magiging compound journal entry siya na debit cash, 95,000, sales discount of 5,000. So, all in all, magbabalanse, debits is equal to credits. Let's go to scenario 2. Let's say, on December 6, Buddy Co. fully paid the outstanding AR to our RC Pudge. So, ano mangyayari? For this, ang mangyayari is, sorry, this should be December 16. So, ano mangyayari is that they paid within 30 days, which is basically, so they paid within 30 days, so this should be December 16. So, wala siyang discount, right? So, nagpay lang siya within the term. So, after December 11, pero still within the 30 days. So, ang collection mo lang is straightforward, no discount, debit cash, credit AR of 100,000. So again, may typo lang. It should be December 16th. And then, finally, you'll have another one wherein magkakaroon siya ng finance charge, which I think we'll discuss naman in your exercises. So with that said, the next thing na we're gonna be doing would be, tapos na tayo sa initial recognition, the next step is to subsequently measure your accounts receivable. So let's say time has passed. Hindi mo pa nakokollect. It's the end of the period. How do you actually create your subsequent measurement for AR? Looking at the balance sheet of this example corporation, mapapansin nyo na instead of just saying accounts receivable, what people usually see is that accounts receivable net 35,000. And what this is telling you is that if ang initial recognition is AR at fair value at point of sale, for subsequent measurement, we report AR basically through its net realizable value or at their cash NRV. So basically, the value for which AR is expected to be collected in cash. So again, initial recognition, fair value, subsequent measurement, net realizable value. Now, aside from this, meron din tayong tinatawag na concept of impairment loss. So ano yung importanteng ma-remember nyo? That at the end of each reporting period, required entities are required to assess na may objective evidence ba that the receivables are impaired. Impaired meaning unlikely siya to be received. So kailan ba nagkakaroon ng impairment loss? It's when your carrying amount of your accounts receivable is less than the present value of your estimated cash flow. So ang mangyayari is that dahil may impairment loss ka, as the name suggests, it would correspondingly result into a loss in income statement. So dalawa lang yung concepts na tatandaan nyo for subsequent measurement. Number one, kailangan i-measure nyo at net realizable value. And then number two, kailangan at the end of each reporting period, it's required na you test for impairment. And ano yung test natin for impairment? You will check if the carrying amount of your AR is less than the present value of your estimated cash flow. So, ano ba yung difficulty? And honestly, for AR, ang pinakamahirap is this subsequent measurement. Not too difficult, but this is the new concept that we're gonna be discussing. So, basically, in terms of the scenario, in an ideal world, lahat ng tao nagbabayad ng utang nila, right? But unfortunately, some receivables, may mga tao talaga na hindi ka nila babayaran kahit na alam nilang may claim ka sa kanila. So the problem here is that not all of your receivables makokollect mo or matuturn mo into cash. So some receivables will become uncollectible. So as accountants, we need to be able to parang forecast or estimate what we call bad debts expense. So as the name suggests, these are bad debts. Hindi na sila magbabayad. And therefore, rather than getting cash, magiging na lang siyang expense. So bad debt expense is our new account. So bad debt expense. So it's reported as an expense in our income statement. So for bad debt expense, there are two ways to solve for it. You have your direct write-off method and you have your allowance method. So ito yung version ng AR ng perpetual and periodic, right? Different way of solving for it. Sa direct write-off method muna tayo. Right? So the direct write-off method is that you write off accounts receivable when actually deemed uncollectible na siya. So actual, meaning alam mo na never mo talaga makukuha yung debt sa'yo. So sa direct write-off method, gagawa ka lang ng journal entry when it's an actual determination na uncollectible siya. So meaning, it only shows your actual losses. But the problem is, it does not follow the matching principle. So ano yung mas magandang method? It's the allowance method. But let's finish lang direct write-off. So, ano major difference? It recognizes your bad debt expense na actual only when the AR is deemed uncollectible regardless of the period. So, direct write-off, actual losses when it's actually deemed uncollectible. On the other hand, allowance method, dahil nga allowance, rather than actual, it actually estimates at the end of the period, ilan out of your AR will be uncollectible. So, ito, it shows AR at cash NRV. Ito yung, it really shows you estimated losses. And therefore, it is the one that actually follows our matching principle. Meron kang 1:1 correlation between your bad debt expense and your revenue. So, in terms of recognizing BDE under allowance method, it's an estimate. It creates what we call an allowance for doubtful accounts at the end of each period. So again, to summarize the difference, direct write-off, actual losses, right? So you recognize BDE only when AR is actually deemed uncollectible, regardless of the period. On the other hand, you'll have your allowance method. So that would be when you estimate your uncollectible accounts receivable. So it shows estimated losses. And then it will tell you, or it will create what we call an allowance for doubtful accounts. So which one follows the matching principle? It would be the allowance method. So punta muna tayo sa direct write-off. So sa direct write-off, dalawa lang naman yung journal entries. Number 1, na-deem mo siyang uncollectible. So ano mangyayari? You will de-recognize your AR, so credit AR, and then rather than receiving cash, we will recognize it as an expense. Debit, bad debt expense. So for direct write-off, your first journal entry would be debit BDE, credit AR of the amount na actual losses. Pero what if nagkaroon ng scenario na biglang nagbagong loob yung hindi nagbayad sa'yo ng utang? Kala mo bad debt expense na, pero binigyan ka pala ng cash. So basically, mangyayari is nabayaran ka from the AR that was written off. So there, ang mangyayari is obviously you received cash, so debit cash, and then bababa yung bad debt expense mo kasi hindi na siya bad debt, nabayaran na siya. So you'll have debit, cash, credit, bad debt expense. So let's look at an example. So after exhausting all means to collect, our Receivables company determined that the following accounts will no longer be collectible. So customer P, 1,440, customer U, 1,300, and customer D, 500. So actually, hindi na raw siya magiging collectible. So let's journalize the write-off. So first step is debit bad debt expense, credit AR. Yun yung journal entry. Where did you get the 3,240? So let me just get the calculator. So you'll have 1,440 plus 1,300 plus 500 is equal to 3,240. Kaya siya naging bad debt expense, right? So debit bad debt expense, 3,240. Credit AR, 3,240. So the 3,240 represents customer P, customer U, customer T. However, nung December 17, si customer U nagkaroon ng payday. So, nag-guilty siya. So basically, si customer U, sabi niya, sige na nga, I'll pay my utang, right? So, ano mangyayari? Na-write off mo na siya as bad debt expense, pero naka-receive ka pa rin ng pera na 1,300. So, what would be the additional journal entry? Basically, ito yung una nating ginawang journal entry, 6.1a. Our second journal entry would therefore be debit cash, naka-receive ka ng cash. Okay, bababa yung bad debt expense ko of 1,300. So that 1,300 represents customer U finally paying off the written off accounts receivable. So basically, ganun lang yung direct write-off method. So unfortunately, mas madali si direct write-off method, but we don't follow that because hindi niya fina-follow yung matching principle. So before going to the next method, are there any questions or clear naman so far? Kindly thumbs up if clear yung direct write-off method. Okay. So we're done with direct write-off. Now we'll focus on allowance method. So ano yung difference? BDE ay direct write-off, actual losses. Allowance method, estimate. Kaya meron tayong bagong journal entry. We call it the allowance for doubtful accounts. So ang mapapansin nyo, ano yung difference? Same na debit BDE, pero rather than crediting your AR directly, we create this new anti-AR account called allowance for doubtful accounts. So pag nagkaroon ka ng estimate of uncollectible, mangyaring debit BDE, credit ADA for the amount na you estimate. And then pag alam mo na talaga na, okay, no chance, na never na sila talaga magbabayad, that's the only time that you will debit your ADA, and then finally, that's when you derecognize a portion of your receivable. So again, direct write-off method, directly kinikredit niya si AR. Pero si allowance method, sinasabi niya, wait, i-estimate muna natin. Let's use a new account called allowance for doubtful accounts. And then, pag alam na talaga natin na sure, hindi na makukolect, meaning mara-write off na talaga, that's the only time that you will credit your AR. So, let's just understand the new account. So, first new account, bad debt expense. Second new account, allowance for doubtful accounts. So, it's a contra asset of AR. So, similar with property, plant, and equipment, you'll have act debt. So you'll get your net PPE. Sa AR, in the financial statement, you'll have AR minus ADA or allowance for doubtful accounts will be net accounts receivable. And it's consistent, di ba? Ano ulit yung subsequent measurement of AR? It should be presented at net realizable value. So if ang total AR ko is 1,969, and out of those, na-estimate ko na baka 137 worth hindi magbabayad. Therefore, ang expect kong ma-receive in cash would be 1,969 minus 137. My net AR would be 1,832. So, in terms of like exercises, pag tinanong ko sa inyo, what's net AR? Automatic. AR minus ADA is equal to your net accounts receivable, which will be at your net realizable value. So, the last thing is, parang, paano kung naka-recover ka ng AR? So, basically, you can reinstate the AR deemed uncollectible by debiting AR, crediting ADA, meaning na-write off mo na, pero nakabayad na pala, and then, magkakaroon ka ng collection of debit cash, credit AR. So this is a 2 journal entry situation. So ang scenario dito for 6.2C, na write off mo na, meaning kinredit mo na si AR. Pero again, nagbago ng loob. So now we will reinstate yung ni-write off nating AR. So now magkakaroon ka ng debit AR, credit ADA. So ni-reverse mo lang. And then finally, dahil naka-receive ka ng cash, wala ka na rin yung AR. So debit cash, credit accounts receivable. Okay, let's just follow the example. So same example as the direct write-off. May 3 kang customers, inestimate mo lang na hindi sila makakabayad na 1,440, 1,3, and 500. So ano difference? We'll have debit BDE. So ito, ano difference? Itong 1,440, yung 1,3, and yung 500, these are actually written off already. So ang mangyayari is, debit ADA, credit AR, 3,240. Kasi, bakit? Hindi BDE ADA. Kasi hindi siya estimate. Actual siya. And then, pag na-reinstate, like yung 1,3 nagbayad, ang mangyayari is, i-reverse mo. So, ito yung 6.2B. Ang gagawin mo is, i-reverse mo siya ng 1,3. So, di ba, dinebit mo sa ADA ng 3,240, i-credit mo naman siya ng 1,300. And then si AR, kinredit mo ng 3,240, magkakaroon ka ng debit of AR of 1,300. And then, dahil naka-receive ka ng cash, debit cash, credit AR of 1,300. Now, some of you will ask me, why not let's just do debit cash, credit ADA of 1,300? It's super important to reinstate the AR just because you always want to know how much of your collectible is being paid or not. So, hindi mo siya pwedeng i-shortcut na debit, cash, credit, ADA. Kailangan mong ipakita na na-reinstate mo muna si AR and then dun ka nakakollect from the AR that was reinstated. So, in practice, in terms of allowance method, how do companies really estimate your uncollectible accounts receivable? So, basically, for this, allowance method na yung susundan natin from the next few slides. So, di ba, in the scenario na binigay ko kanina, it's basically actual losses. Paano na ba natin or paano ba na-estimate ng companies which of their accounts receivable will be uncollectible? Okay, sorry. Thank you so much for the question. Sige, balik muna tayo. So may question. So good morning po. Sa problem statement, how do you know if deemed uncollectible siya or estimate pa lang? If it says in the problem, in the given, determined, no longer collectible, as the name suggests, i-determine mo na sure, actual losses yon. However, pag sinabi ng problem, the company estimated that 5% of its sales, etc., will be uncollectible. That's when it's gonna be an estimate. So again, so good question. It's really gonna leave up to parang how you will understand the problem. So pag sure sila, that's deemed uncollectible. So deemed uncollectible, that's actual losses. Estimated, then that would be estimate, right? Okay, sige, clear. So that's good. So now, let's focus again to allowance method. So let's look at the chart. So in terms of AR, meron kang direct write-off method, meron kang allowance method. We'll shelf direct write-off method kasi it doesn't not follow matching principle. So now, we'll focus on allowance method. Again, allowance method focuses on estimated losses. So now, may two ways ka to estimate your loss. It could be percentage of sales or percentage of receivables. So, for me, ang importante to know is that kapag percentage of sales, it looks at the income statement relationship. Ang focus mo sa sales, income statement, di ba? Saan ba makikita ang sales? Sa income statement. So, for percentage of sales, we'll focus on income statement. So how do we solve it? Total credit sales, we get a percentage of the total credit sales or your net credit sales. So depende kung ano yung sinabi niya. And then the rationale here is that, percentage of sales is based on past experience. So for example, if you're running an agency, and then let's say parang may receivables ka of 100,000 in your first year. And then based on your experience, out of your sales revenue of 100,000 na collectible, honestly, parang 70,000 lang yung nakukuha mo. So, 70% of sales can be collected and 30% would be uncollectible. So, based on my past experience, 30% will be uncollectible. So, in year 2, 200,000 na yung revenue ko. So, how much would be my estimate? Well, based on last year, 30% yung hindi nagbayad. So 30% of 200,000 will be my percentage of sales. And what will that give you? Dahil income statement relationship, it will give you your bad debt expense. So as you can see, percentage of sales, puro income statement. Percentage of sale, nasa income statement. Ano yung ibibigay ng percentage of sale? Bad debt expense, which is an expense under income statement. So income statement yung focus ng percentage of sale. On the other hand, you'll have percentage of receivables. So ito naman, ang focus niya is the balance sheet. So saan mo makikita yung receivables? Sa balance sheet. So basically, ano ibibigay niya sa'yo? Allowance for doubtful accounts. Because ang ADA matatagpuan mo sa balance sheet. So balance sheet naman yung relationship. So ano yung base? You can age the AR schedule. So ang rationale naman ng percentage of receivables will be, it classifies your accounts receivable by age. So let's have a scenario. You have 5 friends. Let's say, umutang sila sa'yo during the whole year. Friend A, or sabihin na lang natin 3 kasi masyadong marami. Friend A, umutang siya sa'yo January. Friend B, umutang sa'yo sa June. And then friend C, umutang siya sa'yo ng November. December na. When you think about it, sino yung pinaka-unlikely magbayad? Siyempre, si January, right? Si friend A. Hindi ka na niya binayaran for like 10 months. So, parang more than likely, hindi ka niya nababayaran. Si June naman, mga around 5 to 6 months kanya hindi nababayaran. May chance pa, baka nakalimutan lang, pero I highly doubt. And then, yung pinaka-newest, yung November, baka may chance pa kasi 1 week mo pa lang naman siya pinautang, right? So, the idea is, the older the accounts receivable, the unlikelier it is to collect your allowance, your accounts receivable. So let's put this into practice. Let's first estimate the allowance. So ang accounts receivable mo, ang usual format niyan is that it will give you your total AR. And then, super important, the age of your accounts receivable. Meron kang 0 to 15 days, 16 to 30 days, 31 to 45 days, and beyond 45. So, different companies have different ways of segmenting the time. Pero the idea here is that si beyond 45 days, yung pinakamatagal, pinaka-unlikely. Si 15 days na 210,000, baka may chance pa. So, our RCPudge company had the following balances of, as of December 31, of accounts receivable, 276,000. So yung 276, yung breakdown niya is 210, 56, 7, and 3. It has an allowance for doubtful accounts of 8,500. And it has net credit sales of 1,250,000. So, ang challenge is, let's journalize and determine 1, our bad debt expense, 2, our allowance for doubtful accounts, and 3, our net accounts receivable if they use different methods. So, punta muna tayo sa net credit sales or percentage of sales. And then, punta naman tayo sa aging of receivables, right? So, ito yung given. Kindly take note. And then, I'll also flash it naman when we go through it. So, first, allowance method, merong first way, which is percentage of sales. So, again, percentage of sales. Dahil income statement, sales is income statement, times the percentage of sales, what it will give you as an income statement account, which in this case will be bad debt expense. So ito yung formula for percentage of sales. Net credit sale times percentage of sales is equal to your bad debt expense. So the company uses 0.5% of net credit sales. So ano yung net credit sales based on the given? It's 1,250,000. Sabi niya, out of that, 0.5% of net sales will be uncollectible. Yun yung estimate niya. So, times 0.5%. So again, be careful. It's 0.5%. Hindi siya 5%, it's 0.5. So, if you use the calculator, it's what? 1,250,123 times 0.005. So, 2 kasi 0.5%. So, your total bad debt expense will be 6,250. So, ano yung journal entry? Madali. Debit bad debt expense, credit allowance for doubtful account, 6,250. Ano mangyayari sa T account mo? In your ADA, meron kang current balance of 8,500. Saan papasok itong credit ADA of 6,250? Sa loob. Sa loob, 6,250. So ano yung total ADA mo? Your total ADA would be 8,500 plus 6,250 is 14,750. So our ending ADA balance is 14,750. So now, tapos na tayo with the two scenarios. Bad debt, 6,250. Final ADA amount, 14,750. And then finally, our net accounts receivable would be 276,000 minus ADA of 14,750. So our net AR would be 261,250. So, in AR problems, tatlo lang naman hinahanap sa inyo. Anong BDE? Ano yung final ADA, meaning itong ending balance ng ADA? And ano yung net AR? Yun yung palaging itatanong. BDE, final ADA, net AR. Any questions sa percentage of sales? Kindly thumbs up if clear yung concept. So, percentage of sales, bad debt expense. Okay. Sige. Okay. Next. Now that clear yung percentage of sales, we go to percentage of receivables. So, percentage of receivables, magkakaroon ka ng what we call an aging table. So again, ano yung concept is that the older the accounts receivable, the higher or more likely na hindi mo siya makokollect, right? So in the next minute, kindly copy this table. So I'll give you 1 minute to copy this table. Okay. So, ano yung format ng aging receivables? Column 1 is the classification of your AR. Column 2 is your numerical balance, which is basically parang the older it is, parang the more likely na hindi mo siya makollect. The third column is yung percent of uncollectability. So as you can see, mas mataas yung percentage na hindi mo makokollect yung mas matanda, 80%, and then mas less likely. So may 2% ka pag mas bago yung AR. So basically, ano lang yung mga kailangan mong gawin? You just multiply the percentage of uncollectability to the balance. So for 0 to 15 days, out of the 210, 2% raw yung hindi mo makokollect. So the allowance for that would be 4,200. For 56,000, out of those, mas tumaas yung percentage of uncollectability. Mga 5%, hindi mo makokollect. Yun yung estimate mo. So 56,000 times 5% is 2,800. For mga 31 to 45 days na may utang sa'yo, 7,000, medyo matagal na, more than a month. So roughly, mga 50% di na magbabayad. That's your estimate. So 7,000 times 50% is 3,500. And then finally, for the oldest, more than 1.5 months hindi nagbayad, wala ka ng pag-asa or wala ka ng hope for them. So roughly 80% feeling mo hindi magbabayad. So 30,000 times 80% is 2,400. Therefore, yung ADA balance mo will be 12,900. So tapos na yung ADA balance, 12,900. So saan papasok tong 12,900? ito yung T account natin. Pag percentage of receivables, the aging receivable will give you the ending balance of your EDA. So yung EDA rather than sa loob, sa labas siya. So 12.9. So now, ano yung difference? From 8.5 naging 12.9. Let's calculate. Ano yung bad debt expense that will lead to a 12.9 ending balance? 12.9 minus 8.5 is 4,400. So 4,400 will be your bad debt expense. Debit bad debt expense, credit ADA of 4,400. So 4,400. And then finally, ano yung net AR natin? Well, it's just basically total AR of 276,000 minus the final ADA balance of 12,900 will be 263,100. So, any questions? So, basically, two different methods, percentage of sales, percentage of receivables. Pero it will always ask you for three things. What's your BDE? What's your ending ADA? And what's your net accounts receivable? So, percentage of sales, it will give your bad debt expense so you can jump straight to the journal entry. Debit BDE, credit AR. And then saan siya pumapasok? Dun sa ADAT account sa loob. So 6,250 nasa loob siya. So that you can get your ending ADA. On the other hand, percentage of receivables will give you naman your ending and ADA balance. So saan siya pumapasok dun sa T account? Sa labas. And therefore, you'll have to solve for your BDE. So ang pinakahuli mong malalaman for percentage of receivables is how much your BDE is. And dun mo lang magagawa yung journal entry. Another note, so sasabihin ko na yung mga common errors. Itong percentage, what we care about is the percentage of uncollectability. So minsan may mga exercises that will try to confuse you. So sabihin nila, percentage of AR na they think will be collected. Pag yun yung binigay sa inyo, that's basically just the reverse. So 2% uncollectability just means 98% yung ine-estimate mong ma-recover mo. 5% uncollectible, 95%. 80% uncollectible, 20%. So, pag ganon, you just subtract the percentage from 100%, right? Are there any questions for percentage of receivables? Can you thumbs up if everything is okay? Or just chat. So, honestly, ito lang naman mahirap sa AR. Like, a lot of it will be BDE, ADA questions. And then, parang aging of receivables lang. So, ito na yung mga different subtopics, right? So, we're done with initial measurement. We're done with subsequent measurement. The last thing that we need to do is disposing AR. So, I'll give you a scenario. Why would you sell your accounts receivable? So, for example, I'm a bank or basically may maraming AR sa akin, right? As an oil and gas extraction company. Now, on average, for oil and gas extraction companies, based on a Forbes study, it takes them over 110.9 days to collect the AR, meaning nakabenta sila, right? Oil and gas. AR nila yon. But for 110 days, hindi nila makukuha yung cash. May utang lang sa kanila yung 110. Now, let's say you're an oil and gas extraction company and then merong mga bad things that's happening around the world, wala ka ng pera. Anong gagawin mo? Nakatunganga ka lang for 110, waiting for the average expected time to receive? No. The more logical idea would be, pwede ko naman sigurong ibenta yung AR ko, meaning, I'm an oil and gas company, I can sell it to a bank. Ikaw na bahala mag-collect. Yung babayaran niya sa akin, ibibigay na lang niya sa'yo. In exchange, bayaran mo na ako ng cash na kailangan ko now. Pero, since you're gonna be the one doing the trouble of collecting, I will give you a fee as a percentage of your collection. So, in terms of this concept, the idea lang is, some companies will sell their AR because their liquidity is low. and mahirap mag-collect ng AR. So rather than wait for their customers or wait for their suppliers to pay them after 110 days, what they'll do is like they'll sell it. They'll sell their AR. So iba na yung magko-collect. Pero in exchange, ang trade-off naman is at least may pera kami, right? So with that said, there are two ways to sell your AR. Ano yung concept? Two ways to sell your AR. Merong discounting method wherein the company receives cash immediately by obtaining a loan against the company AR. So sino pa rin magko-collect ng accounts receivable? Si company pa rin. Collateral lang yung receivable for the loan. On the other hand, for factoring, the company receives cash immediately by selling AR to a financing company, which we call a factor. So a factor means a bank or a finance company. So ano lang difference ng discounting and factoring? Discounting, sino magko-collect? Si company. Factoring, sino magko-collect? Si factor or the bank or the finance company. So for this, ang alamin lang natin is factoring. Right? So who collects the AR? The factor. So when you sell your AR to a factor, ang mangyayari is it's gonna be a compound journal entry. I-recognize mo na yung AR because you'll receive cash from the factor. Pero hindi buo yung makukuha mo. You will have what we call a service charge expense. It's the fee that you will pay the factor na since siya yung magbabayad sa'yo ng maaga, yun yung commission niya, right? So that would be service charge expense. And service charge expense should be reported as an expense in the income statement. So let's look at an example. So our Sipaj company factors accounts receivable amounting to 500,000 to the bank. The bank charges a 2% fee for AR sold. So how do we compute for this? Step 1, credit your AR. Nabenta mo na eh. So i-recognize natin sa AR. Step 2, calculate how much you have to pay the bank. According to the scenario, it's 2%. So what is 2% of 500,000? 2% or 0.02 times 500,000 is 10,000. So our service charge expense will be 10,000. And then the remaining 490,000. So let's freeze muna in terms of this concept. So the idea lang is when you factor or when you sell AR, ang advantage sa'yo is at least nagawa mo ng cash. Pero as a trade-off, ang mangyayari lang is hindi na buong 500 yung makukuha mo. 490 na lang. So you'll rather take the 2% fee because at least yun, sure na pera na yun. So basically yun lang naman yung kailangan yung aralin for selling AR or disposal. So factoring, alamin nyo lang. And then last subtopic for AR would be credit card sales. So I think the reason why we want to discuss this is that, a lot of people, meron silang credit card. So basically, how do credit cards work, right? So basically, in a credit card transaction, there are 3 parties involved, right? So bumili ka from the retailer. So retailer, siya yung nagbenta. Si customer, siya yung nag-swipe ng credit card niya. And then finally, you have the issuer or the bank. Siya yung nag-issue ng credit card. So, kung BPI, BDO, Union Bank, etc., etc. So, ang mangyayari is that the issuer or the bank, mag-investigate siya dun sa customer. So, I don't know if parang you've had an experience applying for credit card. Meron sila mga questionnaires, ina-assess nila, etc., etc. Right? And then, basically, kapag sabi niya, mukha namang parang magbabayad yung customer na to sa akin. What I'll do is that if the issuer is happy when it comes to the information that it received from you, it will give you a credit card. Now, using your credit card, yung customer mo will pay the retailer. So yung retailer receives the cash fast, right? So si retailer, may pera siya kaagad. Pero may accounts receivable si bank sa'yo. Right? So si issuer undertakes the collection. So ang benefit is that si retailer may pera siya kaagad. Now, sino yung magko-collect nung utang mo? Si bank, hindi na si retailer. So that's the benefit of the credit card. Now, dahil si issuer yung mag-undertake ng hassle na mag-collect sa customer na syempre, from time to time, ayaw nila magbayad ng credit card nila, dapat, out of the sale ni retailer, may portion of that sale na mapupunta kay issuer for the trouble of collecting. So, let's journalize these types of entries. So, pag nagkaroon ka ng revenue from the credit card sale and ikaw yung retailer, what will happen would be you will have debit AR, credit card, debit service charge expense, credit sales revenue. And then, pag nakakollect ka ng cash from the issuer, you'll have debit cash, AR, credit card. So, para madali, let's look at an example. So, our Receivables company allows customers to use credit cards in purchasing goods and services. On May 1, credit card sales amounts to 5,000 and PLC Credit Card Company charges a service fee of 3%. What will happen is that you will have a debit AR credit card, debit service charge, and a credit sales revenue. So again, if it's a compound journal entry, ang uunahin nyo is the credit sales revenue of 5,000. And then, ika-calculate nyo, if it's a 3% service fee, my service charge to the company or yung portion ng kita ko na bibigay ko dun sa banko is 3% of 5,000. So what's 3% of 5,000? 3% of 5,000 will be 0.03 times 5,000, which is 150. So net-net, ang makukulik ko lang is AR credit card debit of 4,850. And then, babayaran ka na ng banko, so you'll have debit cash, credit AR of 4,850. So basically, those are the 6 concepts na you have to take note for AR. So with that said, we're done when it comes to AR. We're done with the 50% of this chapter. Are there any questions? So again, ano yung mga subtopics ng AR? Number 1, initial recognition. Number 2, subsequent measurement. So you'll have your direct write-off, you'll have your allowance method, you'll have your percentage of sales, and your percentage of receivables. You'll have what? Your disposal, so discounting and factoring. And then finally, the last subtopic is credit card sales. So yun will comprise 50%, right? At this point, we'll transfer na to the remaining half. So we'll go to the next type, which is notes receivable. So before that, clear pa naman so far. Kindly thumbs up if everything is clear. Okay. So now we go back. There's 3 different types of receivables. You'll have your trade receivables. So trade receivables is comprised of AR and notes receivable. So with AR and notes receivable, we're done with AR. So net receivable naman tayo. So ano important concept for notes receivable? So let's look at the party when it comes to notes receivable. So for notes receivable, you'll have 2 parties. You'll have the issuer and the payee. So si issuer makes the promise to pay. So pag nag-issue ka, you are the issuer. So in return, you will receive the principal and has to pay by maturity date. Si payee naman is the one whom the payment will be made. So siya will receive the principal and the interest. So si issuer, uutang siya kay payee with the principal. So let's say 100,000. In exchange for parang giving him a loan, si payee, aside from the 100,000 that he'll receive from the issuer, he'll also get a percentage of interest. So let's say 10% interest. So you'll get 110,000 si payee. So ganun lang yung dynamic. So anong uses ng notes receivable? It's usually used when individuals or businesses borrow or lend money, or yung amount of transaction exceeds normal limits, or meron ring instances na from AR, nagiging siyang notes receivable kasi sobrang tagal na magbayad. Right? So those are the different instances. So, in summary, notes receivable The reason why it's different from AR is that it has interest and it's actually backed up by a formal instrument of credit. So, ang usual formal instrument of credit natin is what we call a promissory note. So, a promissory note is a written promise to pay a specified amount of money on demand or at a definite time. So, honestly, wala pa akong experience in terms of like seeing what a promissory note looks like. But this is an example. Right. So, ano yung itsura? You'll have the amount na inutang to pay to the order of Wilma Company. So, sino makaka-receive ng 1,000? Si Wilma. Sino yung gumawa? Si Calhoun. And then, how much yung marireceive ni Wilma? Ang marireceive ni Wilma would be 1,000 plus a principal. That's the principal and a portion of interest. So, for this, the key concepts for notes receivable would be two things. Before we make the journal entry, there are two important concepts that we need to learn. Number one is that we need to learn how to determine maturity date. After that, we need to learn how to compute for the interest. And then from there, we can go to the initial recognition, subsequent measurement, and then eventually the disposal of our notes receivable. So, first concept, determine the maturity date. So, ang maturity date, there are different types of maturity date. May mga notes receivable that are on demand, so meaning it's due now or upon the demand of the payee. Merong mga maturity date that is at the end of a stated period, so it's a 60-day note or like a 2-month note. Or there is a stated date. So, sasabihin nila, magbayad ka by September 17, 2022. So, on demand and on a stated date, madali lang yon. Ano yung kailangan yung ma-master at the end of a stated period? So, at the end of a stated period, there are two variations. It could be in days or in months. So, let's see. September 17, in-issue yung notes receivable. Initially, you'd think a 60-day note and a 2-month note would have the same maturity date. Pero, ano yung difference? If it's a 60-day note, what we need to do is to exclude the issue date, but we need to include the due date. So, pare, 60-day note, September 17. So, ang term natin is 60 days. So, how many days left from September? So, ilan days ba? 30 days lang sa September. It's September 17 now. So, 30 minus 17, may 13 days ka sa September, may 31 days ka sa October, so 44 days na in total. 13 plus 31. Paano magagawing 60? Kulang na lang ng 16 days. So, ang maturity date is November 16. So, ang pinakaayaw natin is to see a blank day note kasi kailangan familiar kayo kung ano yung end of the month. So, I don't know if you're familiar with the parang counting your knuckles, pero ang importante is kailangan alam nyo kung ang end of the month ba is 30, 31, or 28 in order for you to be able to determine the correct maturity date. On the other hand, madali lang pag in months. Kapag 2 months, it's just gonna be October, November. So, November 17. So, a 60-day note is different from a 2-month note because 60 days, binibilang mo talaga yung days. Sa 2-month, same number lang. So, 17, so October, November. So, basically, ganun lang. So, that's the first concept. The second concept is that we need to learn how to compute for your interest. So, in order for you to compute for the interest, basically, you just have to multiply the face value, what is stated in the note, times time factor, times interest rate. So, please, may bibigay sa inyong interest rate in the exercises in the problem. Always, the assumption is that interest rate is annual unless otherwise stated. So, yung time factor is just used to prorate the annual interest rate. So, it could be in days, in months, or in years. So, how do you compute for the interest? It's face value times time factor times interest rate. So, let's have an example. 80,000, 6%, 90 days. So how do we solve for the interest for this note? 80,000 times 6% times 90 over 365 will give you an interest of 1,183.56. So this is in days. So pinarate mo 90 over 365. Let's have prorated in months. 500,000, 10% in 9 months. So face value 500,000 times times 10% times time factor 9 out of 12. So it will give you 37,500 in terms of interest. And then finally, and this is the one that is really friendly with you, would be 8% tapos 1-year note. So ito is just straightforward. 800,000 times 8% times 1 year will give you 64,000. So ganun lang mag-compute ng interest. So ano ba yung mga common mistakes ng students? Honestly, ang common mistakes ng students is how to compute for interest rate. So please understand na two major concepts. Number one, your interest rate will always be annual in nature. So kung 10%, meaning 10% spread out within 1 year. Now, yung duration of the note, syempre, you're not gonna get the whole 1 year if 90 days lang yung note. So out of the 6%, you need to get a time factor to prorate that annual interest rate. So kung 90 days, and out of the 365 you'll get 6%, you'll just have to multiply it by a factor of 90 over 365. Same concept when it comes to months. So the idea is 10% of 500,000 is 50,000. Pero in reality, yung 50,000 na yun, marireceive mo lang for 12 months. Pero 9 months ka lang naman umutang. So you have to prorate. So 9 out of 12, kaya 37,500. So now that we're clear when it comes to determining the maturity date and also computing for the interest, we can now go to the initial recognition of your notes receivable. So honestly, madali lang naman. Notes receivable is measured at fair value. So 2, mag-i-issue ka ng NR so that they'll give cash. So you'll have note receivable, credit cash of the amount. Or there's also another way na may utang sa yung AR tapos ginawa mong note receivable. So the idea there is debit NR, credit AR. So subsequent measurement, ito yung mas mahirap. So initial recognition, we just look at the principal. Subsequent measurement, we need to also present a net realizable value. So it's also tested for impairment. And any impairment note is recognized in allowance for doubtful accounts. So now we'll have the disposal, meaning i-collect mo na yung receivable. So basically, ang kailangan mo lang is that meron kang interest na you'll need to earn from that notes receivable. So that would be debit interest receivable, credit interest revenue, and then may 2 scenarios. Nagbayad siya ng notes receivable, so ibabayad niya sa'yo yung cash worth the principal, which represents the notes receivable, and the interest attached to it. So ang journal entry would be debit cash, credit IR, credit notes receivable. So let's look at an example. So RRC Podge received the 6-month note amounting to 6,000 with 10% interest on August 31. The commitment to pay outstanding accounts receivable. So anong scenario to? Nag-issue siya ng NR to settle a current AR. So this would fall under scenario 2. This would be debit NR of 6,000, credit AR of 6,000. The next step is, out of that 6,000, we need to solve for the interest. How do we solve for the interest? We solve for the interest by 6,000 face value times 10%, so 0.1. So for the whole year, dapat, you're gonna get 600 in interest. Pero hindi naman whole year yung note mo. Only 6 months. So 600 times 6 out of 12 is basically 600 divided by 2. So 600 times 6 divided by 12, you'll get an interest of 300. Pero bakit sa December 31, 200 lang yung nilagay natin? It's because when you look at it, August 31. So you'll have September, October, November, December. So yes, correct, you'll receive 300 in total for the 6 months, but out of the 6 months, 4 months only have passed in December 31. So dito ka kailangan mag-recognize ng receivable. So you'll only recognize interest receivable at the end of the period. So December 31. So 200. And then finally, kapag nagbayad ka, you'll receive 6,000 plus 300. So 6,300. And then you will be able to collect an NR of 6,000, an IR of 200. And then yung remaining, diretso na, interest revenue mo for the year. The 100 represents the 2 months, the January and the February of the note collection. So, basically, ganun lang yung journal entries. Kapag na-honor, meaning, when I say honor notes receivable, ang ibig sabihin nun, binayaran niya ng buo. They paid for the principal and they paid for the interest and the notes. So, for 1 minute, just make sure to copy the 3 journal entries. Okay. So, last concept, under notes receivable. So, there's a good scenario, meaning nag-honor sila ng notes receivable. There's a bad scenario wherein they will dishonor their receivable. So, may 2 scenarios naman yan. If there is an expected collection, ang gagawin mo lang is that your NR, you will turn back to your accounts receivable. So, sabihin mo lang na, okay, hindi na siya notes receivable, accounts receivable na lang siya. So, meaning, hindi siya nagbayad, pero feeling ko talaga mag-expect ako ng collection from this. So, scenario 1, you will turn your notes receivable into accounts receivable. So, it's just gonna be a compound journal entry of debit AR, credit NR, credit IR. So, instead of cash. Kapag wala ka na talagang hope for them, that's the only time you will use allowance for doubtful account. So you will have debit NR, credit ADA of the amount, right? And then just in case, aside from that, you have to reverse the interest. Kasi wala ka naman na talagang interest na makukuha eh. So that interest receivable will now become an expense. So ang mahirap dito is that NR dishonored tapos walang collection, you have to do 2 journal entries. Debit NR, credit ADA, and then you have to reverse the accrual of interest. So, let's look at an example. So, at February 28, the customer dishonored its 6-month note to RR Cepage Company amounting to 6,000 with 10% interest. So, ito yung magiging itsura. Right? You'll have, so this should be, so ito yung initial journal entry natin kung nakakollect siya ng cash. But now, but now that you were able na hindi ka nakakollect, pero meron ka namang expectation na magbabayad siya in the future, hindi mo pa rin bibitawan yung mga revenues that you gained. Sasabihin mo lang na debit AR, credit NR, credit IR, credit interest revenue. So wala kang fina-forgo na revenue or receivable. Nililipat mo lang silang lahat sa AR instead of cash. However, let's say wala ka na talagang pag-asa for them. So what would that look like? So step 1, you will have a debit ADA, so meaning meron kang allowance for doubtful accounts of 6,000. You will derecognize your 6,000 in terms of notes receivable. And then yung interest receivable mo from the previous year, you will now categorize as an expense. A lot of you will ask me, ano pong nangyari doon sa interest revenue of 100? Well, you don't need to include it already because you won't even recognize a revenue in the first place, right? So, the last concept for NR, same scenario. To sell notes receivable, you can do discounting or factoring. So, basically, the difference lang is, kapag discounting, it's still the company that collects. Pero pag factoring, it will be the bank or the finance. So, yun lang. Basically, that's AR, that's NR, and then finally, let's just analyze all the financial statements. So, key concept, key theory, current asset mo is receivables. It will always be presented at net realizable value. Now, importanteng financial ratios. We have what we call AR turnover. So basically, that's what this means is that it's a tool to assess your liquidity. Because what your AR turnover will tell you is that on average, gaano karami bang beses mo nakakollect yung AR during the period. So just know the equation. Net credit sales divided by average net accounts receivable will be equal to your AR turnover. And then, you have your average collection period, your second financial ratio, na it's just days in receivable. So, basically, it just measures the number of days the accounts receivable remain outstanding. So, it's just basically a variant of AR turnover. So, this is an example of an AR turnover question. Determine the AR turnover and the average collection period as of December 31. Step 1 is that it's basically net credit sales, so 1,250,000. And then you need to get the average of 263,100 and 216,500. Saan ko nakuha itong 263 and 216? It's basically the net AR. This is 276. So you'll have So you'll have 276 plus 12.9 is sorry, mali. It's not plus but minus. So you'll have 276 minus 12.9. You'll have 263. You'll have 263,100 in terms of net AR for 2021. And yung sa kabila, you'll have what? So ito, you get the net AR also. So the net AR would be 225 minus 85 ADA will give you 216,500. So basically, in-average mo lang siya. Right? So, ang average nito is basically 239,800. So now, you will give what? Your AR turnover would be 5.29 times, meaning for a given period, you were able to collect 5 batches of accounts receivable. So the higher the number, the better. Mas mabilis ka mag-collect. Basically, average collection period is just 365 divided by your AR turnover. So on average, it roughly takes you around 70 days to collect your accounts receivable, right? So let's make sense of this. If every 70 days nakaka-collect ka, how many times in 1 year will you get a turnover of your AR? 70. So let's count until 360. 70. So 1 plus 72 plus 73 plus 74 plus 75. 350 pa. 0.21. Kaya 5 times ka in a year nakaka-collect. And roughly, it takes you around 70 days to collect your AR. So yun lang yung turnover. And with that said, we're done. That's basically chapter 8, accounts receivable. So again, it's AR, NR, and then your financial ratios. So that officially ends chapter 8. So in terms of our next sessions, so Friday, face-to-face tayo, we'll have a special quiz on inventory. I'll also release the grades tonight in terms of your class standing. I will also schedule a consultation on Friday for those that are considering to drop. So pag-usapan na lang natin like how we can maximize the remaining of the SEM. And then next week, since tapos na tayo sa AR, the expectation is we'll have a quiz for accounts receivable. And then punta naman tayo sa PPE. So let's maximize the remaining days of November and December para by Christmas break, you can enjoy the holidays pero mag-review na rin kayo in terms of your exams when we get back. So I think that's everything. Are there any questions? So if not, I can already end the recording. Kindly thumbs up if everything's okay so that I can officially end the recording. Okay. Yeah, go. You can message na lang the question if you have any questions or clarifications. Yeah. Or is this something na outside of the discussion? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Okay, so I think okay, so I can officially end the recording. For the scores, I will update your class standing by tonight. So I'll release it. So that will contain around 65% of your class standing already. Yun. Okay. Sige. So please stand by tonight. I'll send an email. Yeah. Thank you everyone. Have a yeah, and then sa error sa LE1, we'll recomputing the scores lang with some of the questions. Yeah. Yeah, correct. So I'll also update your LE1. Yeah, correct. Tonight trend. Yeah. With the LE1 implications. Yep. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.